Here's the main issue with every English exam. When a senior examiner marks it, they will give a different mark to another examiner 50% of the time. That means if you took the exam tomorrow and got a grade 4 and took it the next day, a separate paper but the same difficulty, you would only have a 50% chance of getting a grade 4 again. You'd have 25% chance of getting a 5 and a 25% chance of getting a 3. What does that mean? Well, it means for your retakes, you've got a 25% chance of getting a higher grade answer with no extra learning. What actually happens in the November retake is only 30% of students get a higher mark. What does that mean? Well, it means since you took the exam in May and then you retook it in November, your extra marks only go up by about 5%. How on earth can that be? How can it be that teachers can only raise marks on average by 5% in all those months? The reason is simple and the reason is surprising. I was astounded to discover it. It's not what you know, it's not how good you are at reading, it's how much you write. So in your preparation for getting the mark that you need, doing the November retakes, or if you're not taking the November retakes and you just want a grade 4, 5 or 6, you just got to think this: I need to make the same number of points as there are marks in the question. Simple as that. The complexity, handwriting speed. I'm not joking, you need to practice fast handwriting. You just have to make as many points as there are marks. The more points you make, explaining the effect on the reader of whatever the point is, the more marks you will get. It is simply a test of quick handwriting. As soon as an idea comes into your mind, you write it down. There is a bonus. You might be thinking, hold on, what if I write something down that is rubbish or wrong? Well, that is the good news. The examiner says, I'll ignore that bit. They don't take marks off for the mistakes you make. They just don't mark the mistake. So you can't go wrong. Speed is much more valuable than crafting the right answer. No, just write every answer you can think of in the time, and the ones that are wrong, the examiner will go, doesn't matter, I'll just ignore it. So just to let you get a flavour of what I mean, I've written a book on question 2. You don't have to buy it, but what I did was go through, and here is my response 5. And you can see I've rewritten a student's answer as different points because I wanted to understand how many points does a student have to write in order to get the marks. Now the same is true of question 3, so I wrote a separate question 3 book and did the same thing. I rewrote about 24 different exam answers to try and find out what it is that students have problems with. And so we have something like response 5, which got 5 marks, even though the student wrote 6 points, because 1 point didn't explain the effect of the reader of the change of focus. Well, I did the same with question 4. When you open it up, here is response 5, which scored 11 marks. They wrote 13 points. 2 of the points scored no marks because it didn't write about the effect on the reader. And so basically each point needs an effect on the reader and a piece of evidence, either if it's a quotation or a change of focus in question 3. It's actually so simple, but therein lies the problem. We don't teach students to write out separate points for each point they're making in the questions. I've never done that until I started going through real students' answers and trying to work out what it was that they were missing. It's this simple. If there are 8 marks, you need to write 8 points. If you only want 5 marks, you need to write about 5 points. And each time you write about a point, you explain the effect on the reader. What does the effect on the reader mean? It means what it makes the reader think or feel or predict about the future. Those 3 things are always the effect on the reader. So it's really easy for you to do because it's what it makes you think or feel or imagine is going to happen later. When I read hundreds of student answers to question 5, I tried to work out what were the main things students could do really easily to get top marks. Here they are. For the description question, Prepare 4 things. A really good description of good weather, a really great description of bad weather, because one or both of those will fit into any piece of descriptive writing that you do, especially as they will give you a contrast, what the place was like in good times compared to bad times. The second thing is to prepare 2 character descriptions that work exactly the same way, positive character and a negative character. 2 characters, 2 bits of description for the weather. You will be able to get a combination of all 4 or just 1 or just 2 into any question that you get set. Now, the advantage of that is you can plan the vocabulary in advance, you can plan the sentence structure, you can plan the punctuation, and you know that in that section of your writing, you will have nailed some marks. It's a really simple way to get grade 4, 5 and 6 nailed on. In fact, I can't imagine how you would fail to get those marks unless the examples you memorized were rubbish. Don't be tempted to steal examples from other writers or from my books. You can adapt them. So, for example, here's a sample answer from my book. Deserted, full stop. Silence echoes through the dark, empty hallways, full stop. People sat behind massive metal gates, full stop. The sound of doors clanking night and day. Now, I changed every single word of that from a student's answer, but the quality is exactly the same. The sentence length is exactly the same. Where they've had a 1-word sentence, I've put in a 1-word sentence. Where they've had a simile, I've put in a simile. So you could do that. You could get some top grade bits of writing from a book or from any of my guides or from my video, and you could rewrite it in your own words to have exactly the same quality. Memorize those bits, whack them in the exam. The examiner's report says, do not plagiarize. We are starting to recognize the same bits of writing coming up again and again. So just don't steal, adapt, which is kind of legalized stealing. It's what good writers do. Now, you can't actually predict what the persuasion question is going to be on paper 2. Although I did predict it in 2022, I wrote 11 top grade answers in this guide, and the reason I was able to do one that actually came up is there are only so many questions that the examiners can ask. And this is because they only ask questions where they know every student in the country will have some experience of it. So, for example, they can't ask you about your opinions about abortion because thousands of students will never have considered what their opinions about abortion are. So instead, they have to ask you about your opinions about travel or social media or sport, stuff that everyone knows about. Well, the stuff that everyone knows about is actually quite predictable. So you could prepare something in advance, and if my guide is anything to go by, you've got a 1 in 11 chance of that coming up, which is not awesome. So the other tactic is to read loads of other persuasive pieces. You can get them for free in newspapers or online if you don't want to buy a guide, and then you can imitate them. But to be honest, if you're already that motivated, you're not looking at grades 4, 5 and 6, are you? You're looking at higher grades because you're already motivated enough to read more advanced writing to improve your skills. This video is also for you if you're not motivated. Just give me the flipping answer. Just help me pass the test, sir. I don't want to have to do much work. Here is an amazing skill. Write every sentence starting with a new word. That simple device will force you to write interesting sentences. I'm not kidding. Try it now. Well, at the end of the video, just write 20 sentences, starting each sentence with a different word. The next trick, vary the length of your sentences. I know that sounds stupid, but if you just have some short and some long, it will automatically change the pace at which your writing flows. It will just change the character of it, it will change the experience of the reader, and it will change your experience of writing it. Just alter the length of your sentences and you will succeed. There is a third thing that you must do, and this does require a little bit of work. Learn how to use commas. You're 16 years old. Some of you retaking will be 17 years old. That's nearly an adult. There is no excuse for not knowing how to use commas. Go out and practice it. Get on the internet, find out what it is that makes commas work. I'll give you a hint. You basically use them every time you use a clause. It ain't hard to learn what a clause is. It's got a subject and it's got a verb. If these ideas are foreign to you, don't worry, because you can see how many things are in a clause. 2 things. Anyone can learn 2 things between now and the exam. It is a clause if it has a verb and a subject. That is when you're going to use commas, adding a clause to a sentence. Every time you add a clause to a sentence, you make the sentence more interesting. Every time you make the sentence more interesting, you get a higher mark. So it all comes down to learn commas, learn clauses, write sentences of different lengths, and start each sentence with a different word. 50% of your marks are available for writing. So if you can do those 4 things, you are guaranteed a good grade in question 5 of paper 2 and paper 1. You have the added level of being able to cheat paper 1 by memorizing some description of your own or adapting, and I mean adapting, not copying somebody else's, and doing the same with character. 50% of the marks that you need handed to you on a plate. There is no excuse for not achieving well in the retake, or if you're not retaking, in the exam. The only reason will be that you have not practiced what I told you. Now, if you want to test yourself some more and find out how to get great marks on paper 2, this is the video to watch next.